Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Welcome to Merryn Talks Your Money, the personal finance edition of Merryn Talks Money. In these bonus podcasts, we talk about the best strategies for making the most of your money. I'm Merryn Somerset Webb, Bloomberg UK wealth editor at large. And this week, we are discussing citizenship by investment. Well, more than that, we're discussing how you get out of the UK, out of the US, out of whichever country you're living in where you don't want to pay the taxes, you don't want to put up with the weather, whatever it is, how you get out of those countries into a country in which you would prefer to live. Now, some countries allow expats to obtain permanent residency if they buy a property or if they invest in the economy in some way. How is that a good idea? What countries have the best programs? Now, every year, Henley Partners release a comprehensive benchmarking of the world's most important residence programs. And with me to have a look at that list and other things is Dominic Volek, Group Head of Private Clients at Henley Partners. Welcome, Dominic.
Thank you very much.
Right, let's start. I think I might have given some hints of this in my introduction, but let's start by talking about why it would be that someone would like to leave the country in which they hold citizenship originally. What are the drivers here?
It's a very good question. I would say the majority of the families that we work with are not necessarily looking to relocate. And so usually when we sit down to have a discussion around what's known as investment migration, right? So we're talking about the industry where you can acquire either residence by investment, this is golden visas, green card in the US, or permanent residence in other countries, or we're talking citizenship by investment, which is, of course, giving you the right to a passport of that country as well. And there's a lot of reasons why people want to explore these things. In the UK, probably a bit more relevant. Last year, as I always say, it's not about relocation and tax. In the UK last year, it was all about relocation and tax. So those are the two biggest drivers, at least for our clients in the UK last year.
So if it's not about relocation, what is it about? If you don't want to relocate to another country, why do you want a residence right to another country? Why do you want a passport for another country if you don't want to live there?
Very good question. So the overriding reason is optionality. So if you're wealthy, you fully understand the idea of diversification, right? So no, individual that is high net worth or above has all their eggs in one basket. You're invested in real estate, bonds, equity, all sorts of alternatives like crypto and wine and whiskey funds. And so therefore, it makes no sense that if you're diversified in terms of your assets, that you're limiting yourself to one single jurisdiction, one single government, and whatever challenges might be in that jurisdiction. So this idea of diversifying your domiciles, having the ability to spend 3 to 4 months in 3 to 4 different countries, depending on the weather, depending on potentially tax, or depending on the whatever geopolitical challenges might be at play. That's the ultimate flexibility for the type of clients that we work with.
Okay, so you might have clients who have residency in more than 2 countries.
Correct. So the idea of a portfolio is the large trend that we see. So our biggest market last year, and probably been growing significantly over the last 2 years, is Americans. And these are not Americans leaving the US or renouncing their American citizenship. It's more a case of them realizing that it makes sense to have plan B and probably plan C and plan D, because who knows what's going to happen, what the next government's going to do. Of course, we saw an interesting election result at the end of last year in the US, and that resulted in a lot of people realizing that you should have an alternative option. It's like an insurance policy. And as JFK said, you don't fix the roof while it's raining, right? You fix the roof while it's shining. And so why risk not having these things in place when you need it?
Okay, interesting. But if you're American and you do not renounce your US citizenship, which most very well-off people wouldn't want to do anyway because there are big exit penalties, right?
Correct.
So you have to pay your tax forward on departure. So you hang on to your passport, but that means that in the main, Americans are not getting other residencies and other citizenships for tax reasons because they would continue to be liable for US tax.
Correct. So for them, what happened in the US, it was actually COVID that sort of kickstarted things, because in the initial lockdowns, Europe said, if you're an American citizen, you cannot enter Europe. And so if I am worth $100 million with a private jet and homes in Europe, I don't like the fact that I can't travel, right? So, but if I had a citizenship from St. Kitts and Nevis, or I had a Portugal golden visa, or I had citizenship from Malta, I could get on my private jet and fly to Europe. So it was the initial lockdowns in COVID that I think a lot of wealthy American families realized they were a bit more exposed than potentially they thought. And that's where it started. And now, of course, it's becoming more and more mainstream there. So the typical American client we have, a lot of them will get citizenship in the Caribbean. Europe is very much part of the portfolio. So if they have the financial capacity, then Austria and Malta for EU citizenship, which gives them settlement rights across the whole of Europe, something that Brits lost after Brexit, or the golden visas in Spain, Greece, Portugal, Italy, very attractive. We have a lot that then throw in something like a golden visa in Dubai. And the ultimate billionaire bolt-hole part of that portfolio is to get permanent residence down in New Zealand, which is as far away from all the chaos in the world. And so that's, what we see some families putting into place.
Will you just go back a tiny bit and define golden visa for us?
So golden visa is usually residence by investment. So, there's lots of different terms thrown around, but the overall industry considers consists of two areas. Citizenship by investment. There's only about 12 or 13 countries where you can invest, pass the necessary due diligence checks, and directly become a citizen and have the right to get a passport. Then you have 30 or 40 sort of legal, transparent, attractive, successful residence by investment programs. And part of that, you have golden visas, where the premise is, again, you invest and in return you get the right to reside in that country. But the beauty of a golden visa is the physical presence requirements are usually little to none. So you can get a golden visa in Greece or Italy, and there's no physical presence required in order to maintain your residence there. In Portugal, you need to effectively spend just a week a year to keep your golden visa. If you have a Dubai golden visa, you get it for 10 years. There's no physical presence required at all. So that's why it's a golden visa. It's an investment-linked residence permit, but with little to no physical presence required.
Okay, so basically all you're doing is you're paying up front for the right to go to that country if you feel like it or if something goes wrong in your own country.
Exactly. And of course, it's often, every family is unique, right? So it might be to get the kids there to study, right? So educating your kids in some of these countries, it's often much better idea to do it under a golden visa or an investor visa rather than a student visa, because the US is a classic example. So the US, of course, has high demand for the education, the schools and the universities in the US. And so a lot of the families we work with, particularly in Asia, they send their kids there on a student visa, they qualify. And then what, right? They either have to try and get an H-1B visa or some type of a work permit, which is not so easy anymore. But if they had sent them on what the US has, the EB-5 investor visa, so if you invest $800,000, you get a conditional green card, your child can go and study, and then they qualify with not only a degree, but also a green card, permanent residence, or maybe even citizenship if they've spent enough time.
Wow, it's amazing what money can buy you. Right, let's look at the best places for this. So I want to move on to younger people in a minute, but let's say you really can afford to pay to buy this kind of residency, this safety, etc. What comes top of the list?
So from a purely residence perspective, the way that we do the ranking is for all the countries that have some form of investment migration in place. We analyze them based on a number of factors: reputation of the country, the quality of the life. Processing time, of course, is very interesting to those who apply, the compliance requirements, investment requirements, whether it's attractive or not from a tax perspective. So that's how we do the ranking. Based on the current ranking, we have Greece at number one. So Greece has a very attractive golden visa program. It ticks a lot of boxes in terms of quality of life. The investment starts at just 250,000 euros. Greece is also interesting from a tax perspective. They have a lump sum tax regime similar to what Switzerland and Italy has. So this year, Greece sits at number one.
When you say lump sum taxation policy, what do you mean?
So Greece has a policy like Italy does where you effectively agree to pay a single lump sum of tax every year. So in Greece, it's 100,000 euros. In Italy, it's 200,000 euros. And if you pay that lump sum, you can be a tax resident and they won't tax you on your worldwide income.
So if you're a rich person living in the UK, you can go to Greece, get one of these residencies, become tax resident in Greece, and only pay 100,000 euros in tax every year.
Correct. So it is interesting for those that are paying, in the higher tax brackets.
For how long?
A lot of them, it depends on the country. So some of them, provide these types of benefits only for, 10 to 15 years, like the non-dom in the UK was 15 years. And if you look at the foreign incomes and game regime that the UK has introduced now, 4 years, it's not particularly attractive to wealthy individuals that are looking to really, set down their roots and make a life in a country. Other countries, offer much longer term such tax benefits. Portugal, been incredibly popular over the years. They've had their non-habitual residence that was only available for the first 10 years. But people are more and more mobile, right? So if I can go and sit and be tax efficient in Portugal for 10 years, then I can move on to Dubai maybe, or maybe Italy in the future. But tax is, of course, an important one.
Yeah, if you know you've got a high earning period ahead of you, if you know you've got 4 or 5 years or even 10 years when you're going to be in a very high earning stage of life and then that's going to end, it makes sense to move to somewhere that's not going to overly tax you on that, right? So that's one reason to do it.
Especially if you have some sort of a liquidity or cash out of a business, then of course the planning around this becomes incredibly important.
So Greece was number 1. What comes after Greece?
Greece is followed by Switzerland and Italy. I guess we've already touched on both of those. Also very interesting from a tax perspective. Portugal, which was at the top of the list for a long time, is sitting joint third place next to Italy as well as the UK. The UK had an incredibly interesting investor visa, the Tier 1 investor visa, which was sort of 2, 5 or 10 million pounds. But of course, that was terminated a couple of years ago. I think the UK is probably missing an opportunity now by not having something to compete in an industry which becomes more and more competitive. And then in fourth place, we've got a tie with Australia. Australia also has curtailed their investor visas to a certain extent. But if you're a high-performing global talent, industry accoladed, great CV, you can actually get permanent residence in Australia based purely on your experience and your credentials. Canada also tied fourth with Australia and Spain. Canada has a very interesting startup visa. So if you have an innovative idea or you have the right profile, you can set up a startup, work with some of the incubators in Canada, and that gives you a path to permanent residence. Spain has had a very successful golden visa, although that's actually going to close now in April. So the Spain golden visa will also cease its operations in April. And then in fifth place, you've got the UAE, which of course has an incredibly successful golden visa regime, not only for investors. If you're willing to invest 2 million dirhams, so about 550,000 US into real estate, you can also do a fixed deposit with a bank. Or again, if you're talented, if you're a senior executive and you earn over 30,000 dirhams a month, you can also get a 10-year golden visa. So the UAE really is very much courting not only investors, but skills and talents globally. And that's why it's also seen, the highest inflow of millionaires. It's been at the top of the list the last 3 years in terms of net inflow of high net worth individuals.
Who are the people who are looking for these programs the most? You've mentioned Americans. Clearly, the British are very much on the move at the moment. The very rich are on the move to try and avoid taxation, and the young are on the move because they're finding it difficult to get high-paying jobs because housing is so expensive, etc. And I saw a number the other day saying a survey showing that 30% of 18 to 24-year-olds in the UK would like to leave the UK.
Yeah. So if you look at it based on a nationality wise, I can tell you, we've got 60 offices around the world. So we've got a pretty good finger on the pulse of who's doing what. Last year, our top 5 was number 1, Americans. As I mentioned, they were about 23% of all our business last year. So a really high percentage of Americans, not necessarily, as I said, on the move, but certainly looking at getting alternative second citizenship and residence. That was followed by, probably some of the more expected markets, India, Philippines, Turkey. And number 5 was the UK for us last year. Both non-doms, looking to move on to the next step, but also a lot of Brits themselves. That started with Brexit, where, the settlement rights in Europe were no longer there. And so those, not even ultra high net worth, but mass affluent Brits who, had retirement plans in places like Portugal and Spain and Greece are very interested in the golden visas there now.
Okay. And let's look at the young then. Where are they going? I mean, I think our listeners are bored of hearing about my 3 days in Dubai, but I was fascinated to see how many young Brits there were there. It's something like 200,000 British people in Dubai now, and an awful lot of those people are very young. And then if you flick through the papers, you'll see almost every week, you'll see a story of where the young are going, why 30-somethings like me are moving down under, I'm moving to Malta, et cetera, et cetera. There's loads of it. Young workers flee UK to gain tax breaks in the Netherlands. There's headline after headline after headline. Where is the easiest, best place for the young to go if they want to get out of the UK, build their CV, get some work, live a better lifestyle?
Yeah, so I think, Dubai, the UAE, I mean, the UAE is not just Dubai, right? Abu Dhabi, Ras Al Khaimah, really interesting jurisdictions within the UAE. But clearly a lot of them are coming into the Middle East. Depending on what sort of industry they're in, there's amazing sort of construction roles and that type of thing in places like Saudi. We do still see a lot of these sort of nomads, freelancers that are very much working on a laptop, places like Malaysia and Thailand from a cost of living perspective. Also interesting for tax reasons, are very common. And in Europe, I guess, the same ones like Spain and Greece and Malta and these places, they also have very attractive nomad visas, digital nomad visas. You don't have to be high net worth and, investing to get a golden visa in some of these places. We see quite a bit of interest into some of the sort of Central American countries like Panama, Costa Rica. We see quite a lot going from the US into Central and South America. I would say that's probably the main ones, but it's about, places like Dubai. Of course, there's lots of wealthy coming there, but there's a lot of teaching jobs. There's a lot of real estate agents, and there for sure the Brits are piling in at numbers like they've never seen before.
Now, if you could choose any of the countries that you recommend to your clients, say you were one of your clients, and here's this huge menu of amazing places you could live, which would you choose? Based not just on the environment, but also on the physical environment, on the tax environment and the political environment. What would be your country?
I would certainly go with Malta. It gives me and it gives, anyone interested the ultimate flexibility because, of course, it's an island state. It's a great travel document. I'm a South African, so, my green mamba is not very useful to me as a travel document. I need a visa to most places I go. So with a Maltese passport, I can travel visa-free pretty much anywhere in the world. And the way I travel, that's quite useful. It's the settlement rights. It gives me 27 EU member states that I can base myself in. Certain people, of course, have a view on Europe currently as well. So I wouldn't say it's the be all and end all, but at least it gives me 27 possible jurisdictions I can live. My kids can go and study. I can work. And of course, within that, there's probably 3 or 4 that are also very interesting from a tax perspective if I actually physically go and become tax resident. So Malta's always sort of the top of I explain it as the top shelf option. But of course, it depends whether you have the financial ability to participate or not.
Yeah, I was letting you have unlimited funds there when I offered you the choice of the world. We should say that one of the reasons why that Malta program is so wonderful is because your firm designed it, right?
It is, but that is why it's so wonderful, right?
Yeah. So you knew exactly what you wanted when you designed it. Anything we've missed? Any visas we haven't talked about? Any countries that either the old or the young or families should be looking at?
Another sort of, maybe we haven't mentioned it, but one of the latest citizenship by investment programs to launch is actually an incredibly interesting one in Nauru, which is one of these islands in the South Pacific. And they've actually created a climate resilience fund. So you can actually donate to climate resilience efforts that effectively will save the island. And in return, you get citizenship of this island. So it's a really sort of innovative way to, address climate change challenges instead of just debating it at COP29. Some of these islands are actually taking their destiny into their own hands.
But what does citizenship of Nauru give you?
Yeah, it's visa-free access to the UK, to Ireland, to the UAE. So again, places that me as a South African, I need to get in a queue and apply for a visa. So here I can do something good for the environment in a country and in return get a citizenship and passport that's quite useful for me as an international business person.
Interesting. And what does it cost?
It's about $135,000 is the cost is the contribution to the fund. That incrementally increases if I want to include my wife and my children. But it's around $130,000 to $170,000 all in.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because that doesn't seem that much to get visa-free access to, say, the UK, Ireland, etc.
Exactly. And of course, if you are worth, $50 million, then it's an absolute deal. And
it's nothing.
It's the same. Yeah. It's the same. Even if you look at a country like Malta, right? Malta, of course, because it's EU, the capital outlay gets up to about €1 million. But again, if you depending on who you're speaking to, if I'm worth $100 million, what's a better legacy for me to leave to my children? Is it another €1 million in the bank, another €1 million in real estate, or actually European citizenship, which gives them unfettered access to Europe that gets passed down to all future generations? I think that's a significantly more interesting investment of my money than, another apartment in London.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I think our listeners might have thoughts on these. Send emails and thoughts on all these things to the usual address, which I'll read out in a minute. Thank you, everybody. Dominic, thank you so much for joining us today. It was absolutely fascinating, and now I'm worried I haven't got enough passports.
We can help you with that.
Of course you can. But let's talk later. Thanks for listening to this week's Merryn Talks Your Money. If you like our show, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, be sure to follow me and John on X or Twitter at MerrynSW and John_Stepek. This episode was produced by Summer Sadi, production support by Moses Andam. Questions and comments on this show and all our shows, always welcome. Our show email is merrynmoney@bloomberg.net.